Hello, I'm Richard Gizbert, and you're at the Listening Post. This week, Kenya erupts and the media report, but there is more than one way to tell the story. India, one country, more than 60 news channels, with more on the way. Fox News runs afoul of its Republican base, and Japanese special effects artists bring a human touch to the Olympics. Welcome back. If you've been watching or reading news early in this new year, then you know all about Kenya. That story, a tragic, violent aftermath to a disputed election, has been all over the world's headlines and news broadcasts. But how does the story that the world's been following differ from the one that Kenyans are being told through their own media? That's our starting point this week, what the reporting of the Kenya story says about media, both global and local. And we'll also look at an ambitious Made in Africa proposal for a new way to cover news coming from that continent. News is like politics in that it always starts out as a local phenomenon. If the story is big enough, it goes global. Kenya is a textbook example of that. An election that was held community by community, tribe by tribe, grew into a global story, the first of 2008, when the ruling party led by Mwai Kibaki declared a dubious election victory over Raila Odinga. The resulting fighting led to the deaths of over 500 Kenyans and the displacement of more than 250,000. But has the reporting reflected the reality?
I think what has been happening, if you talk mainly about the Western media, many of the journalists and correspondents seem to have gone to Nairobi with a preset agenda. They heard that there seemed to be a situation, a context in which there might be bloodshed. And when they reached Nairobi, the first places they started looking for were places like Kibera, the slums, because they knew that might be the flashpoint. And then they started in a very characteristic way to beam the worst pictures that they can from that place.
People have realized that, media is powerful. The protesters see their TV cameras. Of course they want to show, they know that whatever they're doing is being relayed, all over the world. So for them, for some of them, they kind of get motivated by these cameras. When they see the media, they see the pictures, they want to show that actually they're doing it.
At least the outside world was seeing those pictures. Kenyan broadcasters were banned from making live TV and radio broadcasts. And when the government said it was trying to maintain order, it was accused of muzzling the media. And the tribal and ethnic divides that exist in Kenya complicated the way the story was being reported on the ground.
Kenyans obviously are much closer to the story than any of the foreign crews that have come in. But for the first time ever, in my experience in this country, it's actually been a disadvantage to have local Kenyan crews covering this election because there has been so much hatred against some of the TV stations that have been perceived to be advocating either for Raila Odinga or for President Kibaki. So they've had a really hard time covering this election, and as a result they haven't been able to have as much access or freedom of movement as the international crews. So for the first time in my experience, it's actually been better to have outside crews rather than local crews working on a local story.
Kenya's newspapers did not suffer from the same ban that was imposed on broadcasters, but the papers do reflect some of the same ethnic and political divisions that erupted into the violence the world saw on TV.
The media has tried to be very, very partisan. But of course, you can read from the stories. You can see, for instance, the two top dailies. This one, the Daily Nation, and this one, the East African Standard. And basically, the Daily Nation has its story slanting towards the government, whereas the Standard appears to be a bit more radical. The media in Kenya has been very, I think they've done a great job. They've done a great job. But of course, you still see those slants. You can notice the slants are there, especially when they're doing the same story on the same thing. You find some reports are a bit like on the left side and some on the right side. It's very normal.
Kenyans are just like many other African people who totally distrust media that aligns itself with the state, because normally in countries like in African countries, when the media aligns itself to the state, it starts forgetting what its role is.
One thing, though, that I found extremely heartening in this situation has been the way that all the media have pulled together in an effort to try and bring peace to the country, you know, sharing headlines, sharing material, which is something that's never happened in Kenyan media history. That's always been very competitive, and yet for the first time this year, they actually got together to promote a message of peace.
As the violence grew, Kenya's newspapers issued a joint front-page editorial entitled "Save Our Beloved Country." It was an unprecedented act of press solidarity. And some of the papers, including the Daily Nation, provided the kind of context that is often lost when political conflicts descend into violence.
It was very gratifying and interesting to read the coverage by the Daily Nation of Nairobi, which brought forth a detailed analysis of the procedure and the processes that were broken or violated by Electoral Commission, and telling us all how it was done and why the Electoral Commission is the biggest culprit in all this, not necessarily the politicians, but the Electoral Commission. And I think that was very, very enlightening. It starts making us know, if we are to move forward, what should be done.
The government's ban on live broadcasts meant that Kenyans trying to follow the story on TV had to rely on non-African news channels, mostly from the West. But some people want to change that by creating a new Pan-African news channel called Africa 24, on which Africans would be covering their own continent, stories like the Kenyan election, for an African audience.
I think it's a terrible shame that it's taken so long. And if you consider that, you know, CNN started in 1980, it's now 2007, so it's taken 27 years for us to get close to, but not yet at, the launch of a Pan-African news channel. The two co-founders and the very small launch team is very focused on Africa getting to a position where it's able to report the continent to itself and reflect the continent to the rest of the world.
One of the problems the channel is encountering as it tries to raise money from non-African investors is that the Africa the rest of the world sees through mostly Western media is different from the continent Africans know.
The pictures that come out of Africa at the moment are stories of genocide, war, famine, HIV. That's just about all you hear about the continent. What I see as I travel and cover Africa is a continent of great beauty, of great hope, of great potential, of huge opportunity. And that is the difference. And trying to get that across to potential investors around the world, it has been a difficulty.
He's talking about a tale of two continents, the one Africans know versus the one the global media shows the world when news breaks, the way it did in Kenya. Our Global Village Voices now on the reporting of the Kenya story.
What the media houses have been doing is complaining vehemently against the government, but they haven't taken the step of actually disobeying it. At the moment, in the current political environment and security environment in the country, any media house that would dissipate will probably end up being shut down. And I think the cost of being shut down outweighs the risk of flouting the ban for a day or two.
I think the reaction of many people after the announcement of the results goes a long way to show that people are quite informed and people are always glued to their TVs and radio, and they're reading newspapers, so they are up to date, up to the minute with what is going on around.
We're always on the lookout for more Global Village Voices. Email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net, and if you've got a smart take on the global media, we'll find the technology to get your voice on the air. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Fox News, often considered the in-house channel of the U.S. Republican Party, is getting grief from Republicans for its policy on televised debates. This video shows supporters of Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul chasing down and chastising a Fox News host for excluding their candidate from a recent debate in New Hampshire. That debate was limited to 5 candidates, but excluded Mr. Paul, an outsider who nevertheless attracted more votes in the Iowa caucuses than 2 of the candidates who were allowed to participate. Now, what does Fox News have against Mr. Paul, who then held his own televised forum intended to mock Fox? might have something to do with the fact that he is the only major Republican candidate who opposes the Iraq War. Not long ago, the Saudi blogger Fuad al-Farhan was posting information on political prisoners in the kingdom. Now, he's become one. Saudi authorities have confirmed they've arrested al-Farhan and that he's being interrogated for violating Saudi law. Although Saudi Arabia is well known for internet censorship, with more than 400,000 websites covered under a blacklist that's selectively enforced, the 32-year-old Farhan is thought to be the first individual in Saudi Arabia to be arrested for blogging. Al-Qaeda's leaders are on the move. First, they were on our television screens, then they took to the internet. Now we're told we can expect to see them on our mobile phones. Al-Qaeda's increasingly active media wing, known as As-Sahab, is encouraging supporters to spread the video word through mobiles. Exchanging videos via Bluetooth and infrared technology is already popular in the Middle East, and Al-Qaeda clearly wants to capitalize on that trend. Here's a message for news reporters who think they're clever for using Facebook to get their information. What they see on the social networking site is not always what it purports to be. Many news organizations were victimized by a fake Facebook page that they thought belonged to Bilawal Bhutto, the 19-year-old son of the late Benazir Bhutto. Their reporting attributed statements to Mr. Bhutto that he had apparently never made, including quotes on the nature of Islamic extremism. Among the organizations caught up in the hoax, the UK's Daily Telegraph newspaper, Canada's Globe and Mail, as well as the French news agency Agence France Presse. And authorities in Myanmar, famous for suppressing reporting from their country, are now taking fresh steps to restrict information from getting in. They're targeting satellite dishes, not by banning them, but by increasing the cost of a satellite license by 16,000%. The cost of a dish license has gone up to about $800 US. That's 3 times the average annual salary in Myanmar. To be fair, the cost of living is on the rise in the country. However, the increase is still 15,960% higher than the expected inflation rate this year. Coming up after the break, Indian television, where news meets Bollywood.